Okay, everyone, today we are going to talk about volumes of cones, spheres, and cylinders. So your teacher should have already passed out this formula sheet to you and talked to you about it a bit. We have not gotten into the exponential properties yet. That will be the next unit of the lesson. We've already talked about algebraic equations on how to find the slope and what the slope-intercept form is. We've also already discussed the Pythagorean theorem. But like I said, today and for about a week and a half or so, we are going to talk about volumes of cones, cylinders, and spheres. This formula sheet you see, you are permitted to use on the PSSAs. So we will be giving you this actual formula sheet. Your testing teacher will give you this and you can use it. So it's better to be familiar with it now. As you can see, the volume of a sphere is 4/3 times pi times your radius to the third power, or 4/3 pi r cubed. Sometimes the question will give you the radius, sometimes it will give you the diameter. So make sure you always put it back in as the radius. The cylinder formula is V equals pi r squared h, and the cone V equals 1/3 pi r squared h. Now the cone is 1/3 of the cylinder because 3 of these cones, if the cone and the cylinder had the same radius and height, 3 cones would be able to fit in one cylinder. So let's just get started on some of these. The volume. So as you can see here, it is the amount of space inside a figure. The label is always cubic units. Volume, therefore, is always something to the third power. So it could be dealing with meters or inches. So it's cubic meters, cubic inches, cubic, whoops, I just did the same one again. Or it could be cubic centimeters. So remember, volume is always to the third power because it is 3-dimensional. And it's how much space it would take to fill up the figure. So for example, if I wanted to know how much water is in a swimming pool, I would calculate the volume of the pool to find out how much water would fill it up, and so forth. So we're going to talk about different problems. Today we're just going to talk straightforward finding the volume. So remember, the formula for cylinders, if you look back at your formula sheet, would be the volume is equal to pi times your radius squared times your height. So all this involves is plugging and chugging into your calculator. So I have volume equals pi. My radius in this case is right here, and I'm going to label that. So that's my radius. This is my height. So I would have V equals pi times 5 squared times 4 for my height. I can simplify this a bit more. So I would have pi, 5 squared is 25, times 4. If I would actually take 25 times 4, I would get 100. And then I still have pi left over. As you can see, I wrote the number before the pi. You'll always see the number before the pi symbol in any example. Sometimes on your PSSAs, it would be left as the volume is equal 100 times pi. Or if it's not left in terms of pi, actually just multiply those. So in this case, I would have the volume is equal to roughly 314.2 cubic inches. So either one of the circled answers would work. And on this particular lesson, if it's not a whole number, which it probably will not be, please round to the nearest tenth, which means 1 decimal place. Let's try another one. So this time I have V equals, so my radius is right there, and my height is the 7. So I would have V equals pi times my radius squared times my height. If I simplify this a bit, I would have V equals pi times 8 squared is 64 times 7. 64 times 7 gives you 448. times pi. Don't ever forget that you have to multiply it by pi. So like I said, you might see this as an answer choice on your PSSAs, or multiply 448 times pi, and you would get roughly 1,407.4 cubic kilometers. Either one of those answers would work. This next one, this time I'm given my height, but I'm not given my radius. Remember, the whole way across is your diameter. So to get my radius, I have to take half of my diameter, which in this case would be 11. So if I plug this in, V equals pi times 11 squared times 10. V is equal to pi times 121 times 10, which would give you either 1,120 pi, or if you multiply that out, you would get roughly 3,801.3 cubic feet. So as always, I'm not sure which option they would give you on your PSSAs. Make sure you can convert both. And remember to switch between the different modes. If you want to switch between the pi mode and the simplified mode, you can use those arrow keys, which are on the bottom of your calculator, and your teacher can show you that if you're not sure with what I am discussing right now. Why don't you try to do the last two, pause the video, and then press play to check your answers. So for this one, it gave you the diameter, so make sure you found your radius, which is half of that, so half of 4 is 2. I plugged it into my formula, pi times my radius squared times my height, and I multiplied it out. So I could either have 20 pi as my answer or 62.8 cubic yards. This next one, it once again gave the diameter, so I had to convert that for my radius, which is half of that, so it's 1.5. My volume would be pi times my radius squared times my height. If I multiply that out in my calculator, I would have 11.25 pi, which is also equal to roughly 35.3 cubic inches. So that page dealt with the cylinder. If you have questions on the cylinder, please ask your teacher now. If not, move on to the next page. So this next page is dealing with cones. Cones, remember the formula is 1/3 times pi times your radius squared times your height. So remember, this is the exact same formula as a cylinder, however, you have to multiply it by the 1/3. So if I start off, make sure you have your radius and your height, which I do in this example. So for the first one, I would have V equals 1/3 times pi times 2 squared times 7. Now, you can really just multiply this whole thing in your calculator. Plug this whole value in your calculator as you see it. And if you did it correctly, you should get a volume of roughly 29.3 cubic miles. If you did not get this answer by plugging it in your calculator directly as you see it, raise your hand because your teacher will show you how to get that. Next question. I am given my height, which is 18, but this time I'm given my diameter. Remember, you never want your diameter, so you have to break it to find your radius, which in this case would be 9. If I plug it into my formula, V equals 1/3 times pi times your radius squared times your height of 18. If you multiply that all out in your calculator correctly, you would have roughly 1,526.8 cubic miles. Like I said before, if you did not get this as your answer, you're just doing something wrong in your calculator, please raise your hand and see your teacher for help. Why don't you try to do the last two on your own and then press play whenever you would like to check your work. Okay, so your answer for this problem, I gave you the radius and your height, so you literally just had to plug it correctly into the formula. You should have had 201.1 cubic meters. And for this last one, I gave you the diameter, so make sure you found your radius. So my diameter divided by 2 would give you me 1.5. Plug that in for my radius and 10 in for my height. Multiplied it out, and I had 23.6 cubic feet. If you have questions on cones, please raise your hand now and your teacher will assist you. If not, you can move on to the last topic, which in this case would be a sphere. The formula for a sphere, V equals 4/3 pi r cubed. This time it's to the third power. So just like before, you're just plugging in the appropriate value. Make sure if it gives you the diameter, you find your radius first. So, for number 1, if I start plugging it in because my radius was given, since it's only half of the length from the center out, I would have V equals 4/3 times pi times my radius to the third power. Multiply that out in your calculator, and you would get roughly 113.1 cubic feet. Number 2, be careful because I give you the diameter. So for your first step would be to find your radius, or your halfway mark. So my radius would be 12 divided by 2, which is 6. So if I plug V equals 4/3 times pi times my radius, which is 6 to the third power, I would get roughly 904.8 cubic centimeters. What I'd like you to do right now is try to do the rest on this page, and when you are ready, you can press play and check your answers. So pause this page and press play when you have it complete. Alright, so let's start checking your work. For this problem, I was given my diameter, so I had to cut it in half to find my radius. Once I have my radius, I just plug it in 4/3 times pi times my radius to the third power, which would give me 1,987.8 cubic inches. 4/3 times pi times my radius, which was 7 to the third power, would give me 1,436.8 cubic centimeters. The next one, I was also given my radius, so I plugged it in, and I would have 2,144.7 cubic inches. Number 6, I was given my radius, so all I had to do was plug it in, 4,188.8 cubic miles. Down here, I was given my diameter, so I had to find my radius. So 6.2 divided by 2 would give you 3.1. I plugged that in for my radius, and I had 124.8 cubic inches. And number 8 was exactly the same as number 6. It gave you a radius of 10, and you would have 4,188.8 cubic miles. Now, the next 5 questions are just some word problems, but it's telling you the shape, and it will either give you the radius or the diameter and the height if needed. So why don't you try to do these 5, and you can press pause, and then when you are ready to check your answers, please press play. Alright, so checking our answers for number 1, it said the shape was a cone, so I used my formula 1/3 pi r squared h. I was also given the diameter, so I had to find my radius by cutting it in half, which gave me 4. I plugged in my radius and my height, and it gave me my answer of 150.8 cubic centimeters. The next problem talked about a beach ball, which is the shape of a sphere. It gave me my radius, so I just had to plug that into the formula to give me 7,238.2 cubic centimeters. Next one, it gave me the shape was a cone. Also, be careful. Sometimes on a test or PSSAs, instead of using pi, they want you to use just the number 3.14. So if that's the case, make sure you plug that in, which I did there. Gave me my radius and my height. If you multiplied it out, you would have 47.1 cubic inches. Number 4 was a sphere. They gave you the diameter, so I had to cut it in half to find my radius, which was 1. I plugged that into my formula for a sphere, and I got 4.2 cubic meters. And lastly, they gave me a cylinder. They told me the diameter, so I had to find my radius by cutting it in half. So my radius was 2.5, my height was 7. If I multiply it out, I have 137.4 cubic centimeters. This next page is going to be part of your online quiz in Schoology. So you can either start working on this page now or just wait until you get to the question in Schoology. A few things I want to reiterate before we move on would be, make sure whenever I'm saying like cubic inches, cubic meters, cubic centimeters, this right here is just the label. That does not mean you're multiplying something by 3. Remember, volume is always cubic units. It's always to the 3rd power because it's 3-dimensional. And referring back to the very beginning of this packet, make sure you have the formulas for the cone, the cylinder, and the sphere. If you have any questions, as always, ask your teacher, and have a great day.